Joe Biden gives a speech applauding his relationship with various races throughout his 50-year career. Joe Biden is hit for giving the speech. Now, Joe Biden's point in the speech was to highlight this notion of civility, but it was taken in a somewhat different way by Cory Booker, who was joined by Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, to essentially rebuke Joe Biden's use of outright walking out in the door racist to make his point. Joe Biden is unbowed by this, and this created somewhat of a controversy in the Democratic Party. I want to talk about it. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. I find this to be a pretty interesting issue, and this issue has gone on for the past several days, and I don't think it's going to die down since Tulsii Gabbard has added her 2 cents to it. Her 2 cents, by the way, that I don't particularly agree with. Two things can be true at once. Cory Booker can totally be a drama queen when he's pointing a finger at what Joe Biden is doing. Cory Booker, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, all of these people can be overtly political in what they're doing, and they are being overtly political. Joe Biden is ahead. They need to put a knife in him. And Joe Biden, if we're being honest, at worst, was being racially insensitive, and at best was being politically tone deaf and using racists to make a point. Over your 50-year career, those are the people who you raise up to this level of prominence that come to your mind in this particular moment. Okay, so let's be specific. Joe Biden gets caught giving a speech where he is giving heaps of credit to outright walking in the day, overt, unabashed racist. And this is not I think the guy's racist. It's the guy's outright racist. Mr. Biden then recalls serving time in the Senate. I was in a caucus with James O. Eastland, Mr. Biden said, briefly channeling the late Mississippi Senator Southern drawl. Mr. Biden said of Mr. Eastman, he never called me boy. He always called me son. Mr. Biden then brought up a deceased Georgia senator, a guy named Herman Talmadge, one of the meanest guys I ever knew. You go down the list of all these guys, well, guess what? At least there was some civility. We got things done. We didn't agree on much of anything. We got things done. You got to finish. But today you look at the other side and you're the enemy, not the opposition, the enemy. We don't talk to each other anymore. Essentially, Biden is wistful of this kind of old time politics, the good old days. That's what he wants. Now, I don't say that in this kind of hyperbolic way. I mean that from the context of his speech. I want to go back in those times where we used to be able to get along even though we disagree. The problem with this is Biden could have used, I would imagine, other people within the context of his 50-year career, but he just so happened to use people who were overt, out in the day racist. Mr. Eastland, who Biden is talking about, was a plantation owner and thought African Americans were inferior to whites. Biden, even though he wants to say he didn't necessarily have a full-on relationship with this guy, had a relationship with this guy before he got into the Senate and worked with this guy in order to stop integration, or at the very least, slow it down to every degree that he could. Joe Biden was working with this racist. The other guy that Joe Biden was working with, and just so we're clear, before we even go to that point, Cory Booker, of course, flipped out over this. As I said, Cory Booker flipped out. Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris gave pretty strong rebukes of this. Bernie Sanders' one was somewhat more tepid. It was more sheepish, but he gave it nonetheless. He had to play politics to some degree. Cory Booker, after hitting him, Biden comes back. And Biden says this. Because Cory Booker made the point that, look, you should not be raising these guys to the level of prominence in this particular country. What those guys were doing in this country and what they wanted to do for people like me and for the other 13%, I'm paraphrasing, was horrendous. These are not guys you should be touting to show some kind of thing of being able to work across the aisle. This is somewhat of a repugnant thing. Now, and he told Joe Biden, you should apologize. That was the special part. You should apologize. Now, this makes it overtly political to some degree, because who are you apologizing to? I suppose Cory Booker wants him to apologize to all the people that were offended, but Cory Booker was the one that brought this up. Not everybody knew about this. So Cory Booker has got to bring this up and say, you should apologize, sir. Fair enough. Fair enough. So this is Joe Biden's response. Joe Biden is unbowed by this. He's unbowed by this. And I have to be honest, when I first heard this story, I didn't necessarily think much about this story because I often tune Cory Booker out. It was listening to Ta-Nehisi Coates, and he said something that he said, when a person tells you who he is, listen. And I came away with a different perspective of this. But first, let's hear Biden. This is Biden's response to Cory Booker, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, all wagging their finger at him. Even Ocasio-Cortez, all wagging their finger at him. Apologize! You should apologize by now. All right, let's hear him. Is he going to apologize?
Segregationist comment.
The answer is yes. Here's the deal. What I was talking about, I could not have disagreed with Jim Eastland more. And he was a segregated of the views of a lead Democrat. We extended another 25 years, and we got 98 out of 90.
You received from your fellow Democrats on the segregationist columnist?
The answer is yes. Here's the deal. What I was talking about, I could not have disagreed with Jim Eastland more. And he was a segregationist. I ran for the United States Senate because I disagreed with the views of the segregationists, and many of them in the Senate at the time. As I led the Judiciary Committee, I was able to pass, what I was talking about was the Voting Rights Act. I was able to pass the Voting Rights Act when I was a young senator, when he was still the chairman. We voted against him and beat him in the Voting Rights Act. Secondly, when I was chairman of the committee, I extended the Voting Rights Act for 25 years, not 5 years. In addition to that, I made it very clear by the last time as I was on that committee, I was chairman of Foreign Relations, but I was a lead Democrat. We extended another 25 years, and we got 98 out of 98 votes for it. The point I'm making is you don't have to agree. You don't have to like the people in terms of their views, but you just simply make the case and you beat them. You beat them without changing the system.
How does it feel that your Democratic rivals are...
You beat them without changing the system. What does that mean? What does that mean? I don't know what that means. You beat them without changing the system. What system? What system? Economic system? Financial system? What are you talking about? I gotta be honest, often when Biden is talking, I have no idea what he is referring to. It is so all over the place that I am left with this. I have no idea what you're talking about. I understand the basics. He's making the point that, look, these guys are misrepresenting my point. To be fair to Biden, I didn't misrepresent his point at all. I totally understand what Biden was talking about. Biden was talking about civility. I've moved on from that point, and I moved on to somewhat of a larger point of why do you need to invoke racists that you work with in order to stop elements of integration, as to make that point. And I think that's the overarching point, that despite Cory Booker being a drama queen, that he's to some degree ends up drawing a circle around. I'm not offended by this, so don't misunderstand me. And if I'm being honest, I'm not even angered by it. I'm more confused by it. Why would you do this? This is politically tone deaf, and I gotta be honest, displays a certain degree of insensitivity in regards to where you are in the territory to which you find yourself. I was in Egypt at one point, and it wasn't even Egypt, it was Israel. And I was in areas of Palestine. I was in Bethlehem and these other areas. I had a conversation with a woman when I was looking for my visa, and she asked me, She paid for my visa. Actually, I didn't have a cash. And she asked me if I wanted to come with her to areas of Palestine. I hated my cab driver, couldn't stand his ass. He was a Bush supporter. And despite being a Bush supporter, he was telling me how awesome Bush was, and he was cheating me out of my cab fare. She was extraordinarily attractive. I thought she was awesome. She paid my way, and so I was going to follow her wherever she led. And she led me to Bethlehem. I asked her, was it safe? She said, relatively so. Let's go. We get into a cab, and we're in areas of Palestine, and the guy says something, and whatever he says, it had a religious bend on it, and my immediate response was, I am not religious. And before I can get that next syllable out, she shot me a look that could have cut ice. And immediately I shut up. Do you know where you are? Do you know your terrain? Many of these people are extraordinarily religious. And you saying something like that could put our lives in jeopardy, or at the very least yours. Shut the fuck up. Do you know where you are? Now, I say that to say this. 13% of the population is black. Roughly so. About 15% is Hispanic. The 13% of the population of that, around 90% vote Democrat. You need to get through the primaries. You need to get through a Democratic primary. And I would say you need to ask one Mr. Bernie Sanders about losing the black vote and trying to get through the primary without that black vote. I would wager that none of this would be any of issue to Joe Biden if he got through the primary. None of it. It would be an issue to Joe Biden, however, in the primary. And this is kind of where we are. With 13% of the vote being black, why would you do that? This just seems politically weird to kind of use that particular language and that relating in this quite a weird collaborative way with overt racists. How am I as an African American or any African American in this country supposed to accept that? And I got to be honest, this draws a circle around the behavior of Joe Biden and his past. And I got to be honest, his past is somewhat troubling and dubious to me. Joe Biden literally worked with segregationists and racists to stop busing. Worked tooth and nail and raised these guys up. Strom Thurmond, the guy who essentially gave the longest filibuster in the history of Congress, that filibuster being 24 hours and 18 minutes. A lone man given a filibuster for 24 hours and 18 minutes. Why? To stop the Civil Rights Act. 24 hours of bile and 18 minutes of hatred of him standing up. You know who his close friend? One Joe Biden. Joe Biden gave a eulogy to that funeral. And not just gave a eulogy to the funeral. There's videos out of Joe Biden talking about how awesome Strom Thurmond is.
That's a very nice introduction. It could have been shortened a great deal by saying Joe Biden is here tonight. He works for Strom Thurmond. I cannot get over, and literally, if some of you who have watched on CNN broadcast various Judiciary Committee hearings, I have been so conditioned by Senator Thurmond that I still refer to him as Mr. Chairman, and I'm the chairman. I don't know quite when I'll grow up to realize I really am the chairman, and Strom is not. I suspect Strom will never let that happen. So now I'm back at it again, and I have checked in not with my doctors, but with Strom Thurmond to find out what medicinal remedies I should undertake, and he.
I'm not going to play this whole video because I don't want to get dinged, but the point of the video is Joe Biden talking about how awesome Strom Thurmond is. How awesome Strom Thurmond is. Just to give you a heads up, Strom Thurmond, while running for governor, all the laws in Washington and all the bayonets and the armies cannot force the Negro into our homes, onto our schools, onto our churches, our places and recreation and amusement. it seems like it was just more than just politics. You seem to have gotten along with this guy quite well. Here's another point. Joe Biden's letters to Eastman have started to surface. And oh my God. I mean, look, what it boils down to is Joe Biden was working with these guys closely in order to stop busing. He was against it. His community was against it. Now, whether he personally was against it or whether it was because his community was against it, it's kind of besides the point. This was one of those things dealing with integration of the civil rights movement that Joe Biden was trying to stop and was working with virulent racists to do so. That is troubling to me. More troubling to me, however, I mean, he's fighting against the flow of history at this point. More troubling to me, however, though, is the crime bill. The crime bill is more troubling to me. Joe Biden worked with Strom Thurmond, this racist, to put as many black bodies in prison as Joe Biden can get, or this law can get his hands on. They knew this crime bill was racist, and Joe Biden pushed this crime bill through anyway. The Strom Thurmond, Joe Biden crime bill. They worked on it anyway. Do you know that that an investigation was held because they wanted to understand why there was such a disparity of blacks in prison, meaning why the dynamic. Blacks only make up 13% of the population, less during that time. Why are so many in prison? And they found that it had to do with the disparity between crack and cocaine. It's the way the law treats it. It targets crack and gives it a huge jail time, where cocaine, not so much. Well, cocaine, they're pretty much the same substance, but cocaine was more so used by the rich, crack by the poor. They criminalize crack ferociously. Joe Biden was one of these people that was headlong in this camp, to the right of Ronald Reagan when you look at some of these videos of putting people in prison. They knew that crime bill was racist. They knew the effects of what that crime bill was going to be, and they pushed that crime bill through anyway. Bill Clinton comes out, apologizes. Joe Biden is unbowed. And I'm making this point that think of the number of people that are sitting in a prison cell right now with these elongated sentences. Joe Biden believed these people were unrehabilitatable. I went for it. I don't know if that's the right word, but you get my point. Let's hear him out. Let's hear Joe Biden make his case on why people who use crack should be in prison so much longer than people who use cocaine, despite them being similar substances.
Statements, but let's look at the facts. Since 1986, Congress has passed over 230 new or expanded penalties for drug and criminal offenses in this United States. 230 new penalties. And these penalties range from an automatic 5 years in jail for any person caught with a rock of crack cocaine, a piece of crack cocaine as small as a quarter. I don't have a quarter with me, but if you visualize what one looks like, yeah, I do have a quarter. If you have a piece of crack cocaine no bigger than this quarter that I'm holding in my hand, 1/4 of $1, we passed a law through the leadership of Senator Thurmond and myself and others, a law that says if you're caught with that, you go to jail for 5 years.
Just so we're clear, he's bragging about working with that racist to put black bodies in prison. Let's be very clear what we're talking about here. Joe Biden knows exactly what he's talking about when he's saying this disparity between crack and cocaine. And if you have this thing of crack, we're going to send you to prison for 5 years. It doesn't really matter what the judge wants. It doesn't really matter other circumstances. You're going to prison for 5 years. We did that. He's bragging about that. And he's bragging about that working with that racist. You think that racist is getting kicked out of throwing black bodies in prison? You think that racists don't know that he's doing that? I guess I'm trying to make a point here. This notion that Joe Biden was kind of barely working with these types is nonsense. Joe Biden has a track record that goes back 50 years. The first thing that he thought of were these people for a reason. It's because he had a close relationship with these guys working on these issues like anti-busing and throwing back bodies in prison. Just saying, call it what it is.
You get no probation. You get nothing other than 5 years in jail. Judge doesn't have a choice. Now, the fact of the matter is, we've gone from there all the way up to saying, under the leadership of Senator Thurmond, and I'd like to suggest that I take some small credit for it myself as well, and others, the presiding officer, that there is now a death penalty. And we passed it a couple years ago. If you are a major drug dealer involved in the trafficking of drugs and murder results in your activities, you go to death. And
this wasn't a passing relationship. That's my point. Now I'm going to ask a different question. With blacks voting for Democrat at 90%, or the rate of 90%, is it right? Is it just? Is it fair for me to bypass what Cory Booker was getting at and get to a different question of whether or not I should be able to look at what Joe Biden did in his past and make a judgment on whether or not I should agree with that? Like, don't I, as an individual who's a particular race, get to look at an individual's track record over his last 50 years and ask the question of whether or not I am okay with the behaviors that that person took, with the results of those behaviors? The black bodies that were thrown in prison as a result of him being to the right of Ronald Reagan in this case. Should I care about that? Why shouldn't I care about that? You goddamn right I should care about that. And yeah, I would make that stance that blacks should not vote for Joe Biden, looking at his track record and looking at the other people that are in the race. That's where I'm standing. And I say that looking at the fact that this guy has had a track record with racists that he seems to be completely unbowed about. I don't want Joe Biden to apologize. I don't care about Joe Biden's apology. I don't know what apologies do one way or the other. I'm not offended by Joe Biden's behavior. I don't think anybody should be offended by Joe Biden's behavior. Cory Booker, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, all of them were being outright political in their motivations of piling on Joe Biden in this case. But I'm making a different point than they're piling on. I'm saying that there's a larger rationale at work, that despite Cory Booker being a drama queen, Cory Booker was kind of hitting at it. Joe Biden has a dubious track record going back to the past. Ta-Nehisi Coates made an extraordinarily good point that Joe Biden was working with all of these races. Joe Biden raised these guys to the level of prominence, applauding this as this kind of his showing this notion of civility. Hey, I can work with these horrible racists. Watch, this is this great level of civility. The guy that hired him and brought him from irrelevance and put him in the vice presidency left up to the people who Joe Biden was working with would not only not exist, but would be an outright and complete abomination in their eyes. Even if you think that there is no issue with Joe Biden in these relationships, and look, I'm one of those people who would imagine that, yeah, you have to work with all sorts of people. But if you're in a primary where a large section of that primary just so happened to be African American, and you're having a conversation with someone, and someone asks you about civility, or you're trying to make a point about civility, the people who you don't raise to a level of prominence that you want to talk about you working with as this kind of great thing are outright racist. Overt, out and out, not I think, outright, in the day, racist. I don't want Joe Biden's apology. I just don't think black people should vote for him. That's where I'm at. There are other people in the race. You don't have to go to him. His track record is dubious at best, and I'm sorry, it's somewhat problematic. There are people who responded to this, so let's hear if somebody's taking the piss out of me or if they're somewhat agreeing with me. My computer is extraordinarily sluggish. I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to have to restart this afterwards. Come on. Jesus Christ. Nothing is moving. I watched Democracy Now! I was watching Tanishi Coates. And when I first heard Cory Booker, I was watching this and I was like, God, man, these guys they know what Joe Biden was saying, but they were sidestepping it. And they were doing it for political reasons. It's politics. Fair enough. And I thought about it from the perspective, we've had a complicated history in this country. And there's a reason why African Americans are in the Democratic Party. Part of it is because a bunch of swamp monsters jumped into the other party, and we knew where the monsters lie. It gets a little bit weird when Joe Biden is raising these guys up, and he's in the Democratic Party, and there are a lot of African Americans in that Democratic Party, and they ask this basic question of why on earth is Joe Biden raising the hand of this racist as the epitome of bipartisanship? What the hell is Joe Biden doing? And so I asked this question. What the hell is Joe Biden doing? And why would Joe Biden do something like this if you're going to run around like you're the champion of civil rights? Biden called Jesse Jackson a boy during his 80th presidential bid. Yes, he did. Bilal Salam. Yes, he did. Keep bringing the truth. Donald Smead. Thank you, Donald Breathe. Could you check out my work if you have the time? Jason from Detroit. I can't make no promises, Jason. I am a busy man. But maybe. Whoa, what is this? Why are you asking me questions? Come on. Skip it. Are you serious? All right. John Matthews, white male. Your biggest fan. I'm sorry. Joe Biden, why did you stop reading my messages, homie? I just want to be your friend, sad face. Let's see. Well, I can read messages that aren't racist, sexist, or something, but I have a rule against those. All right, here we are. I can read this one. This one is risque, but still. I just want your love. I've been with you since day one. I don't think you've been with me since day one. I seriously doubt that. Back when you were a Republican, I was never a Republican until you figured out you can make money pretending to be a liberal. I've never been a Republican in my life. You're a black Tim Pool, but I still love you. Please love me. We blacks need to be home. I've never been a Republican. You must understand, there's a bias against black Republicans in the black community. It's ostracized. Like, there's a reason why 90-something% of blacks are Democrats. We fully understand where the monsters are, and to some degree it's almost built into our DNA at this point. Keep in mind, you're socialized to some degree into certain cultures, communities, and so forth. And I have to be honest, I even after I've gotten older, I somewhat understand where the bias is coming from. If Biden is the nominee, it would prove that the Democratic Party has learned nothing from 2016. The result of the 2020 election will probably be the same result. You know, the sad part, I think Hillary is more competent than Joe Biden. Like, some people would make the point of saying, you know, Joe Biden is Hillary in a pants. That doesn't fully work because Hillary wear pantsuits. But she's more competent than Joe Biden. Even though Joe Biden seems to be more affable. Like, Hillary Clinton was, you know, she was awkward. I mean, to some degree, she was awkward because people attacked her so much. She became somewhat, you know, flinching, if that makes sense. Joe Biden was affable to the point of ridiculousness. This is child stuff. Why would you say that? I mean, be honest. I can understand somebody being in the camp for Joe Biden, but for the moment, be extraordinarily honest. Joe Biden when Bernie Sanders tried to go through the South, what happened? He got slaughtered. He got slaughtered because he lost the African American vote. Hillary Clinton was out there hugging every black baby she could find. Oh, I have hot sauce in my pot. She's like guzzling hot sauce on stage. She's doing everything she can. And she alienated the white vote because of how far and hard she went to that black vote. when she was running that race, I thought to myself, but blacks only make up 13% of the population. I literally kept saying, but blacks only make up 13% of the population. What is she doing? What is she doing? I didn't quite understand it. And not to mention, her own political strategy missed the point that the alienation that she was trying to allow for Bernie Sanders, that somehow that she would be immune to this. Part of the plan was to make Bernie Sanders the quote-unquote white candidate. Do you remember that? That was the code. Bernie Sanders could only get white people. He could only get white people. The part of them doing that was to cast him as the white candidate, kind of like a light version of Trump. In this case, they can alienate people from Sanders, meaning people of color. Why wouldn't the same thing be true? Like, think about what I'm saying. Why wouldn't the same thing be true in the reverse? If you're trying to make this argument that you can create a bubble around Sanders where minorities wouldn't get close, it's kind of like a gravitational field that minorities would kind of bounce away from, by tarring him as a white candidate. If you become the black candidate, why wouldn't the same thing be true to you with whites? It's a bizarre what they were doing. I kept saying they only 30%. It was a bizarre strategy. Look, my point is this. Put yourself in the place of African Americans for the moment. I understand Clyburn came out for Biden. I don't care if Clyburn came out for Biden. Clyburn is essentially a servant of power at this point. He serves the established order of things. And I understand he was part of the civil rights movement. I'm saying in this case, he is serving the established order of things. Put yourself in the place of the 13% that's here in this country that support the Democratic Party. And you hear him say that. And you have people who are still alive, who remember what it was like to live in the 60s, what it was like to live with these people who were against segregation. Might have even been there to hear Strom Thurmond, this guy that Joe Biden loves so much, stand on stage for 24 hours of hatred and give that speech where he's essentially trying to stop the flow of history. What are you to think? I never said Joe Biden was racist. You never heard me say it. This video has gone nearly 2 minutes. Jesus Christ, 32 minutes. I never said it. Never said it. I just said he has certain objectives. That he was working with people who are virulently racist. And if you're working with people like that, I am going to feel some kind of way about that. And it's not so much that I have no expectation of you doing that while you're working in the Senate. But why are you raising this to me as if it's, this is the pinnacle of working with another person? You hand in hand with some racist? Are you serious? What were you doing when you were hand in hand with that racist? Oh, putting black bodies in prison for longer prison sentences. Yeah, I'm supposed to love that. I'm supposed to love that. Get out of here. Get out of here. Can't be serious. You can't be serious. What am I really supposed to do with that? Yeah, what am I supposed to do with that? He used to rate my racist messages. It was the most meaningful thing that ever happened to me. I was going through a dark time and I thought I found someone who would read my racist messages, but I guess you don't care about your fans. I have been here since late 16. Well, I've been here for like 2 years, so you weren't here in the beginning. And, I have a policy against reading racist messages. Racist, sexist, anti-Semitic. I don't care per se, but other people do. In which case I have a responsibility to my audience, not to necessarily offend audience members. I personally look at this stuff as, I don't know. I look at the problem with the person, not necessarily what they're saying. But yeah, it's somewhat of a policy. Biden is a goddamn racist. People are known for the company they keep. See, that's an interesting thing, but I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go there. Now, you can make a case that says people are for the company to dedicate. Fair enough. Fair point. And guess what's in Toronto? Cops goes after blacks at a horrible rate. Patrick Seguin. Racists are trolls. Stop giving them attention. Order of chaos. Well, order of chaos, like I said, I did. That's policy now.